Alright, fingers crossed that that shares nicely. Let's see. Can anybody else hear me? Okay. Alright. Their assignments. That's good. Sounds good. Okay. Where's everybody with their assignments? We've got an NSS on Monday evening, and I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to add too much more than what I put in those YouTube videos, but at least we can have a discussion about it on Monday evening. But just a reminder that although you've got an extension, it's going to creep up on you guys pretty quickly, I'm sure. The rest of the campuses are starting to wind down with their contact sessions, and within the next sort of 2 weeks we'll be largely finished, and we'll still have a little bit of a way to go. So make sure that you are staying on top of it. All right, we have our last two resistance poems to go through this evening. The Weaver Bird by Kofi Awanar and Adrian Rich, I'm in Danger. So, can I just get a hands up who's read through these so far? A thumbs up or a thumbs down if you have or haven't. And tell them, do you have Renee notes? Right. So, all right, no problem. I'm in Danger, so it's not my favorite of the set poems that we have to go through, which is why I leave it for last, just seeing how much time we have to dedicate to it. But they're both relatively short poems with, I think, relatively straightforward messages and interpretations. So let's get going, shall we? The Weaver Bird is page 214, I think, in Seasons Come to Pass. No, of course I'm wrong. 219, thank you. Why do I even try? I should just ask you guys. So 218 maybe in the PDF and 219 in at least my version of Season 20 Plus. Okay, so much like the letter from a contract worker, the poem by Kofi Awanar speaks significantly to the colonial situation, the colonial endeavor, and it's quite a highly symbolic poem, and uses once again very strong natural imagery in order to develop its message. So I'm just going to read through it, and I will open up for comments afterwards before having a look at the imagery in specific. The Weaver Bird. The Weaver Bird built in our house and laid its eggs on our only tree. We did not want to send it away. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying. And the weaver returned in the guise of the owner, preaching salvation to us that owned the house. They say it came from the west, where the storms at sea had felled the gulls, and the fishers dried their nets by lantern light. Its sermon is the divination of ourselves, and our new horizon limits at its nest. But we cannot join the prayers and answers of the communicants. We look for new homes every day, For new altars who strive to rebuild the old shrines defiled by the weaver's excrement. So, tell me what you make of that. I wait with bated breath. Let's see if anybody else has any input. Matau, you had read through it. Chantal, you had read through it. What are your thoughts? All right. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to interpret what is going on here. The poet is using natural imagery because it's a romantic tendency, I suppose, to provide the reader or the audience with imagery that they're already familiar with. So everybody knows what a weaver bird looks like, or should know what a weaver bird looks like. These little yellow bastards that hold their nest in great numbers on thorn trees and any other tree that will hold the weight of all the nests. And the poet is speaking in the first person plural. So, the weaver bird built in our house and laid its eggs on our only tree. This poem from the outset does appear to be a commentary on the colonial past of Ghana. So, the poet himself is Ghanaian. Ghana's colonial history is British. It had a British colonial power in charge of it for quite some time. And he speaks in this poem about how the native population of Ghana watched with interest the initial settlement of the colonizers in the land. So, in many instances, when countries had this colonial history, not always, but in many instances, the colonial powers come in small exploratory numbers. They set up trade agreements with the local people. They engage them quite sort of not benevolently, but generously and in a relatively friendly fashion, in order to try and establish a foothold. So this is why I think the weaver bird built in our house. Yes, and the guy from earlier. The weaver bird built in our house and laid its eggs on our only tree. So this sense of reproducing or increasing its own numbers in their land, on their symbol of land, the tree. But they didn't want to send it away. Like, there was space for them. They weren't doing any harm. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying. So we actually took active sort of roles in helping them settle. And then the tone changes, so it becomes quite bitter here. And the weaver returned in the guise of the owner. So now think about the colonial settlement that happens under force. Land is claimed in the name of, in this instance, the British Crown. And the local population who've lived there, you can almost sort of see them going, well, this was our land and now you're calling it your land. But obviously the British come with a significant amount of force. So, and the weaver returned in the guise of the owner, preaching salvation to us that owned the house. So this was our land. This was our property, essentially. And now you come here preaching salvation. So when we look at post-colonial literature, whether it be prose or poetry, there are certain tendencies that the authors or poets will have, things and themes that they will address. And one of the big sort of bones of contention in post-colonial literature is religion. So somebody, and bear in mind, it's not going to be easy to answer, so you can generalize a little bit, but what faith or spiritual practices exist in African cultural settings prior to the colonial era? How are people practicing faith? What are they practicing in the pre-colonial times before the settlers arrived? Okay. Traditional practices, ancestral worship, African spirituality is a word that's often used to kind of blanket define a type of spirituality or religion before Christianity is brought to the shores. And here we have the supposed missionaries, which are often a large part of the colonial endeavor, wanting to not just anglicize but Christianize the nation. The weaver returns in the guise of the owner, preaching salvation to us that own the house. They say it came from the west, where the storms at sea had felled the gulls. So the weaver bird in this instance is the it, I think, the subject. They say it came from the west. Now, if you know where Ghana is situated, it's, I suppose, technically on the west coast of Africa, but it's on the south side of the bulb of the North African continent. Um, so the colonial forces come down the west coast of Africa and set up shop. They set up their settlements on the west coast. So they've come from the west. They say it came from the west, where the storms at sea had felled the gulls, and the fishers dried their nets by lantern light. So these people are referring to the edge of the known world, the edge of the world that they were aware of at the time, and that's usually the coast. Its sermon is the divination of ourselves. Remember, the it here is the weaver bird, the colonizer. Its sermon is the divination of our souls, and our new horizon limits at its nest. So read it how you want, but for me, the poet here is speaking about how the lessons or the spiritual lessons being taught or enforced by the weaver bird, the colonizer, define what makes them sanctified or divine or not. So it's talking about how Christianity becomes forced upon the locals in the area, and how, if you don't convert to Christianity, you're living in sin, or you're practicing sort of anti-Christian worship, or you're heathens, whatever it is. So there's this very big drive to Christianize people in the colonial setting. It's about sort of imposing the culture of the colonizer onto the culture of the colonized, and saying, you don't have a choice. You will talk the way we want you to talk, you will believe the way we want you to believe, or you won't either receive assistance from us or you will receive violence from us. So this kind of forceful conversion of people to the primary religion of the colonizers is a huge issue in post-colonial literature. It's a big theme, I should say. Its sermon is the divination of ourselves, and our new horizon limits at its nest, that everything we must see and experience and think about must be thought about through the frame of the Christian church. This big line that we see afterwards here, let me just highlight it, sorry, one sec. This one. But we cannot join the prayers and answers of the communicants. Quite significant, I think. Why can't the Ghanaians, why can't we join the prayers and answers of the communicants? Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about this today and thinking about talking to you guys about this when I was at BC Durban North. And just around the corner from BC Durban North, there's a large public park and public bathrooms attached to it. And those public bathrooms, geez, still in the early 2000s, I guess they hadn't been gotten to, but there was a sign on those public bathrooms that said "Geen blankes," no whites. And I remember my mom wanting to like capture that before it kind of somebody took it away, or it rotted, or disappeared, or was vandalized. She wanted me to go and take this sign off the bathroom, as a kind of a moment in history, and I refused flat out to go and steal from a public bathroom. But anyway, it's when thinking about this poem, I always think about that public bathroom that still had the Geen Blankes on, and it was not something I grew up with. I was never aware of that until these things were pointed out to me. Now, I know that some of the online students are from KZN and from Durban. So those of you who are and you know about the Nchanga railway line, you can go from Stoker's Arms in Kloof to Nchanga and back. There's a whole bunch of old train carriages there at the train yard, or whatever it's called. And some of them still have these signs on them, these signs of segregation. You know, these are the train carriages for black people, and these are the train carriages for white people and for non-whites. So yeah, I think that this is what the poet is leading into here. That you've forced your religion on us, and you told us this is how we are to view the world, you know, under threat or penalty of whatever it is that the colonizers were threatening them with. But we can't even be in the same church as you. We can't join you in that worship that you tell us we must practice. It's quite significant, the hypocrisy in it. We look for new homes every day. For new altars we strive to rebuild. I think that's quite interesting use of language there, but the last line is so powerful. The old shrines defiled by the weaver's excrement. So we look for new homes every day, moving away, literally, or you know, migrating away from the settlements of the colonizers, sometimes being forced, sometimes voluntarily doing so, but looking for a way to redefine themselves, to restart and reestablish themselves outside of the reach of the colonizer. For new altars we strive to rebuild. There's a contradiction in terms of new and rebuild. Does anybody know what the notion of syncretism is when it comes to religion? See if anybody can give a response to that. I'll wait for just a minute for that and then we'll carry on. Yes. So there are a number of different representations of syncretic treatment of African spiritualism and Christianity that are evident fairly close by to most of us. So Shembe here is one of the ways that Christianity has become Africanized in a way. Yeah. And this line speaks to me. The amalgamation of different religions, cultures, thought, interfaith dialogue, and syncretism. Yeah. So if you think about the versions of African Christianity that we see practiced all around us every week, there's this readoption or reinterpretation, I should say, of the message of Christianity into a format that is more palatable and digestible for the African mindset. And it's a way of almost taking, okay, well, you've shoved this down our throats, but now we're going to make it ours. Now that we believe what you believe, we need to believe it in our way, and we need to practice it in our way. So we have these syncretic African Christianities that pop up all over the place, and it's just a really tangible example of what happens in the colonial setting when you try to force a religion onto a group of people who don't practice anything near it. You see it in other colonial settings in South America, Mexico, for example. There's a lot of quite, what I think would be considered quite concerning or dark practices that surround the Catholicism that is often practiced in those areas. But it's a mixture of the spiritual worship of the original inhabitants of the land and the colonial setting. So it's all over the place. And this looking for new altars, we strive to rebuild new ways of understanding the old ways, I think is what he's trying to say here. New ways of practicing the old ways. The old shrines defiled by the weaver's excrement. Yes, thank you, Laura. So, that last line, the old shrines defiled by the weaver's excrement. Like, if you want to talk about tone in this poem, there it is right there. That is bitterness in a line. The old shrines, the old faiths, the old ways of practicing and believing, defiled by the weaver's excrement. It's a very eloquent way of saying shat on by the weaver. It's our ways were tossed out, were cracked all over by the invading weaver, and as a result, we have to find a new way forward. So it's quite an aggressive poem in a way. It's quite bitter, at least after the first few lines. It's quite sad to think that there's this setup that happens at the beginning. The weaver bird built in a house. We didn't want to send it away. We watched the building of the nest and supervised the egg laying. This was okay for us. This was okay up until a certain point when they kind of crossed the line and said, now you will be like us and we will not be like you. The poet has this resentment, I think, towards the colonial setup of Ghana. So it's a nice little poem that uses a lot of natural imagery that, like I said, we can get quite familiar with. We can visualize in our heads, and it's a simple way of transmitting the message. Any thoughts, any questions, any arguments with regards to what's been said so far? Yeah. Okay. Just going to change the poem on screen. Give me a few shakes of the lamb's tail. While I'm setting this up, I'm noticing my dog's creeping closer and closer to me the more the thunder starts to hammer outside. They're very subtle little things. Cool. Okay, so I sent this link earlier on. I was looking for a site I'd seen last year and I came across this, and it was quite helpful because of all these references we see on it. So this poem by Adrienne Rich, a little bit of background and history. Adrienne Rich is a very accomplished poet. She initially married and had children, and at some point her marriage started to dissolve, and she moved into the home of her lover. She became out as a lesbian, and much of her writing became very focused around women's issues, women's rights, as well as sexuality and gender. So she's somebody who is speaking about these things in a time when it was still very, very taboo to do so. Aside from all these horrible, irritating ads all over the page, what is quite nice is these reference points. So the title itself comes from a letter between Emily Dickinson and this guy Higginson, who was something of a mentor for hers. And it seems to have a tone of cynicism where he was critical about a poem that Emily Dickinson had written, often insisting on large edits to kind of create more conformist and uniform poetry. And when you open up the link here, it brings up the actual letter itself. So I'm just going to skip to the end where she mocks his criticism of her. Let's see if I'm translating this. There we go. You think my gait's spasmodic. I am in danger, sir. You think me uncontrolled. I have no tribunal. It seems to be in reference to her writing style as being inconsistent and unreliable, and that she's in danger of kind of making a fool of herself. So there comes the title of the poem where Adrian Rich, our poet, is making a comment about the type of criticism that female poets get. It is something of an ode or an homage to Emily Dickinson's poem. So, Emily Dickinson, also one of the most prolific writers of poetry. I think there are something like more than 1,300 poems written by her, but not all of them were published, and not even those that were published were not published in the original format that she wrote in. They were subject to quite significant editing to make them a little bit more conformist. So I think although Emily Dickinson was such a prolific writer, her truth, or like the truth of her writing, is not necessarily that evident to us. Okay, excuse me, I'm just going to have a sip of water and then we'll go on. Okay. Half cracked to Higginson, living afterwards famous. Your hoard of dazzling scraps, a battlefield, now your old snood, mothballed at Harvard, and you in your Veroria monument, equivocal to the end. Who are you? Gardening the daylily, wiping the wineglass stems, your foot pulsed on behind a forehead battered paper thin. You, woman, masculine, in single-mindedness, for whom the word was more than a symptom, a condition of being, till the air buzzing with spoiled language sang in your ears of perjury. And in your half-cracked way, you chose silence for entertainment. You chose to have it out at last on your own premises. So, anybody care to take a dig at what that might all be about? It's quite inconsistent. It's quite all over the place. And the tone, the use of language, even the form of the poem is quite unusual. It's on page 203 in your book, if you have it in front of you. I'll get started, shall I? So this half cracked, you'll see, is repeated right at the beginning here. Oh, all right, I lost it. And then right at the end as well, half cracked. What does half cracked mean? To your mind, you don't have to come up with an accurate definition. If I were to call you half cracked, a bit mad, yes, yeah, a little bit insane. So Emily Dickinson was something of a shut-in. Although she wrote a great deal of poetry, she was something of a social recluse. She spent much of her life locked away in rooms. She often wouldn't greet visitors when they came to visit her family. Many of her friendships were carried out via letter. She didn't speak to people. Although she had these kind of mentors who she wrote to, who would help her with her work and critique her on her writing and so on, like Higginson. But there's this kind of notion that she was a bit weird bit strange for the time. Excuse me. Half cracked to Higginson, even to one of her mentors, described as being half mad. Living afterward famous in garbled versions. Afterward famous in garbled versions refers to the fact that most of the publishing that we have of Emily Dickinson comes from after her life. So once she was dead, her work was published. But the garbled version seems to reference the fact that much of Emily Dickinson's poetry was, in fact, edited. So we don't know that how much of what we read when you read Dickinson is actually her work versus the editing of people like Higginson. Your hoard of dazzling scraps, a battlefield. She would write poems on anything, receipts, little pieces of paper, napkins, etc. So your hoard of dazzling scraps, the battlefield. These were found by her, I think her relatives, her sister-in-law, especially after her death. All these little like scratchings of poetry. One of the things I must mention is that there seems to be, even in these like manuscripts, the original pieces of poetry that she had put together. Thank you, Lou, that's great. These little poems that she had scratched, some of the ones that have made it into the public light have been edited themselves. So text has been erased and replaced with something else. And under, I don't know if it's X-ray or some sort of exposure to light, the name Susan seems to have been deleted from a lot of Emily Dickinson's poetry, and Susan was her sister-in-law. She seemed to be quite fond of her sister-in-law, and if not somewhat obsessed, inappropriately interested in her sister-in-law. So the assumption on my behalf is that whoever managed to edit these was trying to make it a little bit more like acceptable. That there was this implication of something taboo in the reference to Susan so often. Okay, so Rich talks about this hoard of dazzling scraps, a battlefield. So people kind of fighting over the rights to Dickinson's writing, to edit her writing and put it together and publish it for her. Your old snood. I love that word, snood. I think there's an image of it if you click on this. I wonder. No. There it is there. Okay, a snood is a woven fabric hairnet worn over one's hair, often associated with unmarried women. There you go. So I think I like the word because I'm thinking of the Lorax. I don't know. I think they call it a snood, the thing that he created that's so amazing. So often associated with unmarried women. She never got married. She never had a partner. So this is something maybe that she has made more symbolic than anything else. Your old snood, mothballed at Harvard, and you in your Verorium monument, equivocal to the end. Who are you? Okay, so this collection of artifacts from her life that are held in display. It's quite sad actually to think like this woman was quite a recluse, and decided or wanted to spend her life relatively by herself. I suppose the suspicious person in me wonders if she wasn't perhaps an undiagnosed person on the spectrum at the time. Anyway, so the fact that her various kind of belongings and what have you have been collected and put on display is quite the opposite of the way she lived her life, and it's a little bit of a betrayal, I think. Okay, equivocal to the end. Who are you? It's as though Adrienne Rich wants to speak to the notion of Emily Dickinson. She wants to know who this woman was and what she was really like, and because she was so private, of course, we'll never know. Gardening the daylily, wiping the wineglass stems, your thought pulsed on behind a forehead battered paper thin. One of the things that is known about Emily Dickinson is that she was a prolific horticulturalist, and she had a great collection of plants in a like a herbarium, a what do we call it? Like the glass houses that we store plants in. Greenhouse, thank you. Yeah, I'm not very good at like garden stuff, but you can see that comes through in my language about it. So I think the site here has a little bit of a record. There you go. She created a herbarium of more than 400 species of flowers. That sounds like a hyper focus or a hyper interest to me, but it was a passion of hers either way. Aha! And a daylily does only flower for 1 day. That's a lot of dedication to put into something to see it only flower once off. Does it flower once off like in its life or once annually or something like that? Okay. Told you, when you analyze poems over and over and over, especially in a group context like this, you get greater kind of context. You always learn something new. I love it. These quite domestic images of her gardening, wiping the wine glass stems, belies the intelligent mind, the passionate mind that Adrian Rich sees in Emily Dickinson. Your thought pulsed on behind her forehead, battered paper thin. That there's all this activity going on. It's almost hammering away on the inside of the skull of Emily Dickinson, while she's sitting there, wiping wine glasses and gardening the flowers. You, woman, masculine in single-mindedness, for whom the word was more than a symptom. Um, Adrian Rich is known for juxtaposing masculinity and femininity as a way to highlight or discuss stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. And while she says you, woman, says masculine and single-mindedness, it's attributing this characteristic of surety to a masculine tendency, and almost saying like, this was two people in one, somebody who was both feminine and gentle and masculine in their aggression and certainty, for whom the word was more than a symptom. So Emily Dickinson, like people like E. E. Cummings, was known for treating language a bit playfully, like she would seemingly randomly capitalize words, as you'll see Adrian Rich has done here with perjury at the end. And she would be then kind of edited back and say, well, no, you can't do that. If there's no significance to using a capital P, you're going to have to, keep it as a lowercase p, for example. So the word was something to be explored, something to be re-understood for Emily Dickinson, more than just a symptom, more than just a thing or a symbol to use in language. It had meaning and could develop different meaning. And yeah, Adrian Rich, I think, recognizes this, saying that the word for her was more than a symptom of an era, was more than a way of explaining what was going on. It was something to be molded and malleable. A condition of being. Till the air buzzing with spoiled language. There is some suspicion that Adrian Rich has used buzzing to reference a specific poem of Emily Dickinson. Same with perjury, but the use of the capital P here seems to be a reference to what was said earlier in the previous stanza. Just have a look as well at how these stanzas are laid out. You have enjambment, you have caesura, but it's inconsistent. So where you have this, for example, after smooth, this lack of caesura, the lack of punctuation to slow down or to end a statement, it just kind of jumps a line and carries on in the next stanza. And Adrian Rich is being quite kind of modernist about her use of poetry. She's rejecting the standardized format of poetry, and again, maybe speaking to the fact that Emily Dickinson was almost forced to change her poetry into a way that would be a little bit more traditional. So Adrian Rich is going the other way, being anti-tradition here by completely disrupting almost the point of having different stanzas. So I have a look and see how many lines are in each stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So she's not stepping too far away from the norm and the standard. She is changing it up a bit, but not completely. Okay. A condition of being till the air buzzing with spoiled language sang in your ears of perjury. So it can be referencing the fact that Dickinson herself changed language and treated it the way it's not normally treated. That could be the spoiled language, or the fact that her language that she chose as a way of expressing herself was spoiled by others. Please close. Yes. Sorry, it feels a little bit odd. Okay, last stanza. And in your half-cracked way, you chose silence for entertainment. Chose to have it out at last on your own premises. This half-cracked reference again, this kind of half-boiled, half-mad way, but it's playful. And this half-cracked, it's more like in your quirky way, I think is a better way of interpreting it. In your half-cracked way, you chose silence for entertainment. This refers to the isolation that Dickinson seems to have preferred. She didn't speak a lot. She didn't speak to people telephonically or in person. She wrote letters to them, but kept herself secluded because that's what she wanted. And I think in the stanza, the poet is giving her credit for that and almost giving her kudos, saying, your half-cracked way, you chose your silence for entertainment, your silence as the way you wanted to live, chose to have it out at last on your own premises, to live and die in your own home by yourself the way you wanted to live. So there's a tone of kind of respect, I think, in that last stanza where she's acknowledging the fact that although Emily Dickinson was writing in a time when it was difficult for women to be educated, let alone published, that she stuck to her guns as much as she possibly could and lived and died in a way that she wanted to, not in the way that other people told her she should. So it's one of the more abstract poems. The language is abstract, it's highly referential, it's intertextual, and it's why sites like this, although Genius.com is not necessarily what I'd call an academic site, when somebody has done the work to connect some of the references for you in order for you to be able to have a look at where this could possibly be coming from, I say use it as a way to understand the poem in a way that might help you. Kaboom! With thunder rumbling, we come to the end of the set poems for resistance poetry. How are you guys feeling about your assignments now? Some of you guys have put forward your poems for me to have a look at already. I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm really excited about seeing what's going to come in. I'm going to ask the other English 1B2 Sue to pull some of her favorites and see if we can't draw them together in an anthology. So if you guys do, and we want to use your poems, we'll of course seek your permission first. Lou, I think we could see something out of you. Try it. Try fiddling around with it. scared of poetry. What a statement to make. Well, guys, if there are no queries, like I said, I'll be online on Monday again for the NSS. I'll put out a reminder tomorrow to go to all the groups. Do watch those YouTube videos, please, before you join that NSS, and come with any other questions or queries about your sources or about the direction of your argument. Lou, I will tell you this as a disclaimer, and anybody else must take this as well, that I have seen some stuff in these poems. The kind of language that would make my mother blush, certainly not me. It's okay. It's really okay, as long as it's purposeful. You know, if there's rage and there's language, then it must be there for a reason, and that comes through in your reflective essay. I'll share a little poem that I wrote last year, and you'll see what I say is acceptable. I'll just have to dig it up on my phone somewhere. I'll put it on the WhatsApp group and open myself to criticism from everybody. Okay, so if there are no questions, then please go ahead and log off and have yourself an evening. Yes, I did. Thank you, Lou. I achieved what I hoped to achieve, and that was being bored at some point. It was very relaxing. And I treated myself for my 40th birthday with a tattoo today, and it hurt like all hell, by the way. Thank you, Chantal. Bye. The worst in childbirth, Lou. Yeah, Chantal, this was on my calf, and it's I don't know why. Maybe the skin is really thin there or something, but it felt like I had to control my breathing at some point. It was really lame. Right, it depends on where you get it, hey? I think a lot of people say when there's not much distance between muscle and skin, like there's not enough fat underneath, it becomes quite painful. Guys, go away. We'll catch up on the WhatsApp group. Good night.